The crossbow bolt shattered the dawn stillness like thunder, sending Elara Stoneheart tumbling backward against the ancient temple wall. Her right arm, which had been steadying her weapon moments before, now hung limp at her side, a jagged piece of metal embedded deep in her shoulder. Blood seeped through her worn leather armor, dripping onto the mossy cobblestones in dark, steady drops. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elara, report your status. Commander Thorne's voice echoed across the ruined courtyard, but she could barely hear him over the ringing in her ears. The ambush had been more sophisticated than intelligence suggested, and her squadron of rangers had walked straight into a trap. She pressed her back against the crumbling stone wall, trying to assess the damage while enemy bolts whistled overhead. Through the swirling mist, she could see Finn 20 meters away, clutching his leg and calling for aid. Bryce lay face down on the mossy stones, motionless. The rest of her squad was scattered, pinned down by coordinated fire from 3 different positions among the temple ruins. Elara flexed her right arm and immediately regretted it. White-hot pain shot through her shoulder, confirming what she already knew: her dominant arm was rendered useless. 3 years patrolling the Shadowlands, 2 medallions of valor, and a reputation as the finest crossbow specialist in the King's Rangers. And it might all end here because she couldn't properly load her weapon anymore. But as she watched another volley of bolts chipstone from the wall above her head, Elara Stoneheart felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. In the forgotten villages of the Mistwood, the burning need to prove that being underestimated was the biggest mistake her enemies could make. 6 months earlier, the Rangers' outpost at Ravenwatch had bustled with the controlled chaos of warriors preparing for the spring campaign season. Elara stood in the armory, methodically checking the tension mechanism on her custom crossbow, while her squad prepared for another day of hunting. Shadowfell raiders along the borderlands. "Stoneheart, you're up for promotion to First Ranger," Quartermaster Varric announced, approaching with a scroll bearing the royal seal. "Captain wants to see you at sunset. Word is they're considering you for squad commander, youngest specialist ever to make the rank." Elara looked up from her weapon's firing mechanism, her dark eyes reflecting the armory's torchlight. At 26, she had already earned a reputation throughout the Ranger Corps. Born in the remote village of Okalo to farmers who struggled against harsh winters and harsher raiders, she had joined the Rangers at 18 with nothing but determination and a natural talent for marksmanship that astonished her instructors. "What's the catch?" she asked, wiping oil from her hands with a worn cloth. "Nothing good comes without strings attached in the Rangers." Varric grinned, his weathered face creasing into familiar lines. "The catch is they want you to train a new squad. Fresh recruits from the academy, barely finished their oaths. Command thinks your approach to problem-solving might rub off on them." Elara's unique approach had earned her both commendations and reprimands over the years. She had a tendency to improvise when standard tactics failed, leading to spectacular successes and equally spectacular arguments with superior officers who preferred their Rangers to follow protocols precisely. Her service record contained equal amounts of praise and concern about her creative interpretations of Ranger doctrine. "When do I meet my new apprentices?" she asked, already dreading the responsibility of keeping inexperienced Rangers alive in the most dangerous territory in the kingdom. "Tomorrow," Varric replied. "And Stoneheart, one of them is your replacement as squad leader if you accept the promotion. Command wants to see how you handle transitioning authority while maintaining effectiveness in the field." The implications hit her immediately. This wasn't just about training new Rangers. It was about proving she could lead beyond the technical aspects of combat. They were testing whether Elara Stoneheart, the girl from Okalo who had learned to hunt in her village's dense forests, could become the kind of leader the Rangers needed for their future. That evening, Elara sat on her bunk reading the records of her incoming squad members. Recruit Lyra Dawnecrest, 20. Scholar from the Royal Academy, before enlisting parents wanted her to be a court mage. Recruit Tomas Redfallow, 18. Grew up in the mountain villages. Joined after his sister was taken by raiders. Recruit Kale Ironfist, 23. Former city guard from the capital. Changed paths after a mission gone wrong, left him questioning his place in the world. Each record told a story of someone seeking purpose, redemption, or a chance to serve something larger than themselves. Elara recognized the hunger in their enlistment portraits, the same desperate need to prove their worth that had driven her own career. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She closed the scrolls and walked outside to the small observation platform behind her quarters. The mistwood forest stretched like a dark sea against the star-filled sky, its ancient trees catching the last light of sunset. Somewhere beyond those woods, Shadowfell raiders were preparing for spring campaigns, crafting the traps and ambushes that Elara and her squad would spend coming months hunting. Couldn't sleep either. Elara turned to find Captain Mira approaching with 2 steaming cups of spiced tea. Mira commanded the ranger company that provided oversight for special operations, and over the past year, she and Elara had developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared frustration with ranger bureaucracy. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Elara said, accepting the tea gratefully. "Varric says they want me to take on a training role. Part of me wonders if they're trying to move me away from the action because I make them nervous." Mira laughed, settling onto the bench beside her. "You make everyone nervous, Stoneheart. That's what makes you so effective. You see solutions where other people see problems." She paused, studying Elara's profile in the gathering darkness. "But maybe it's time to think about sharing that gift instead of just using it." The conversation drifted to safer topics, families back home, plans for the winter solstice celebrations, speculation about whether the outpost would still exist in 5 years, but Elara's mind kept returning to the records and the weight of responsibility they represented. The next morning brought her first meeting with Recruit Dawnecrest, who arrived at the armory 30 minutes early and had already completed the daily maintenance checklist for 3 of the squad's crossbows. "First Ranger, I wanted to review the specifications for the new composite bows before our briefing," Dawnecrest said, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone accustomed to academic environments. "I noticed some discrepancies between the manual and the actual performance capabilities listed in the field reports." Elara studied the young woman carefully. Dawnecrest stood barely 5 feet tall, but her posture radiated confidence and intellectual curiosity. Her questions about the crossbow's design were sophisticated, demonstrating a grasp of engineering principles that exceeded what Elara had expected from someone fresh out of academy training. "The manual is wrong about a lot of things," Elara said finally. "Real-world applications have a way of proving that scholars sitting in comfortable towers don't always understand how their equipment performs when people are trying to kill you." Over the following hours, Elara introduced Dawnecrest to the other team members and began assessing their individual strengths and weaknesses. Redfallow proved to have an intuitive understanding of traps that reminded Elara of herself at his age. He could look at a simple arrangement of vines and immediately understand how it might be weaponized. Iron Fist brought tactical awareness from his guard background, constantly scanning for threats and security vulnerabilities that pure ranger training might miss. But it was during their first live exercise that Elara discovered something unexpected about her new squad. They worked together with a natural synchronization that usually took months to develop, anticipating each other's needs and covering weaknesses without explicit direction. "Dawnecrest, what's your assessment of the secondary trap?" Elara asked as they approached a training mechanism buried in the outpost's practice range. "Given the positioning and the decoy components, I'd estimate 60% probability of a secondary trap positioned to target first responders," Dawnecrest replied. her voice steady despite the pressure of being evaluated. "Red Fallow, can you confirm the pattern?" Red Fallow studied the disturbed earth and nodded. "Definitely something buried about 15 meters northeast of the primary mechanism. Pattern matches what we've seen in intelligence reports from the northern borderlands." Elara felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. These recruits were learning faster than she had anticipated, which was both encouraging and dangerous. Confidence without experience led to fatal mistakes, and she had seen too many promising careers end in shallow graves. The training exercise concluded successfully, but Elara noticed Iron Fist seemed distracted during the debriefing. His answers were perfunctory and his attention kept drifting to the communication crystals that linked the outpost to scout units operating along the borderlands. "Something on your mind, Iron Fist?" she asked after dismissing the others. Iron Fist hesitated, clearly wrestling with whether to voice his concerns. "First Ranger, I've been monitoring the communications from the patrol units. There's been a significant increase in raider activity along the Western Pass in the past week. 3 incidents involving buried traps that our intelligence reports said weren't supposed to exist in that area." Elara had noticed the same pattern, but she was impressed that Iron Fist had connected the dots without prompting. "What's your conclusion?" "Either our intelligence is wrong, or someone is feeding information to the raiders about our patrol routes and timing," Iron Fist said quietly. "In my city guard experience, when criminal patterns change suddenly, it usually means someone on the inside is providing information." The implications of Iron Fist's observation settled over Elara like a cold weight. If there was a security breach at Raven Watch, her squad would be walking into traps designed specifically to exploit their standard procedures. Everything they thought they knew about enemy capabilities and intentions might be compromised. That night, Elara requested a private meeting with Captain Thorne, the outpost commander. Thorne was a career ranger who had earned his reputation, leading patrols through some of the fiercest fighting in the Shadowlands. He listened to Elara's concerns without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grim as she detailed the pattern of incidents Iron Fist had identified. "How confident are you in this assessment?" Thorne asked when she finished. "Confident enough to recommend changing our patrol patterns immediately," Elara replied. "If I'm wrong, we lose some tactical flexibility. If I'm right and we do nothing, we start losing people." Thorne nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. "I'll initiate a security review and restrict access to patrol information to a need-to-know basis. In the meantime, I want your squad to start varying your approaches and techniques. Assume everything we do is being observed and reported." As Elara left the commander's office, she felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Her squad's safety now depended not just on their technical skills, but on her ability to anticipate threats that extended far beyond the traps they were trained to defeat. The next morning brought news that validated her concerns in the worst possible way. A patrol from Oakshield Company had hit a complex ambush along the Western Pass, exactly where Iron Fist's analysis had predicted increased activity. 2 Rangers were dead and 5 wounded, including Sergeant Kell, whom Elara had known since her first deployment. Standing in the outpost's healing chamber, watching mages work frantically to stabilize Kell's shattered leg, Elara felt the familiar cold rage that had sustained her through 3 campaign seasons. Someone was playing games with Ranger lives, and she intended to find out who. Dawn-Crest approached her quietly, having heard about the attack through the outpost's informal communication network. "First Ranger, Red Fallow and Iron Fist are reviewing the incident reports from the past month. They think they've identified a pattern in the timing of attacks that might help us predict future incidents." Elara looked at her newest squad member with a mixture of pride and concern. Dawn-Crest was learning to think tactically, but she was also developing the kind of personal investment in the mission that could cloud judgment and lead to unnecessary risks. "What kind of pattern?" Elara asked. Attacks seemed to cluster on certain phases of the moon and specific times of day that correspond to shift changes at checkpoint locations along the main routes. Dawnecrest explained. If Redfallow's right, we should be able to predict when and where the next incident is most likely to occur. The sophistication of such planning suggested enemy capabilities far beyond what intelligence reports had indicated. Elara realized her squad was facing an adversary who combined traditional raider tactics with modern intelligence gathering and analytical techniques. Over the following weeks, Elara's squad began operating under the assumption that their every move was being monitored and analyzed. They varied their routes, changed their timing, and developed hand signals to communicate information that couldn't be trusted to standard communication crystals. The paranoia was exhausting, but it kept them alive. As other units continued to suffer casualties from increasingly sophisticated ambushes, Redfallow proved particularly adept at thinking like a raider trapsetter, accurately predicting where devices were most likely to be hidden based on terrain analysis and traffic patterns. His rural background had taught him to read landscape and weather in ways that rangers from urban backgrounds often missed. The thing about people who set traps, he explained during one briefing, is they're lazy, just like everybody else. They want maximum effect with minimum effort, which means they're going to choose locations that are easy to access, hard to detect, and guaranteed to have targets. Iron Fist's guard experience became invaluable for understanding the human intelligence networks that supported raider operations. He identified patterns in local civilian behavior that often preceded attacks, helping the squad avoid areas where enemy surveillance was most likely. But it was Dawnecrest who made the connection that changed everything. While reviewing specifications for captured enemy mechanisms, she noticed components that shouldn't have been available to boarder raiders, sophisticated triggering devices and explosive compounds that required supply chains extending far beyond the Shadowlands. First Ranger, these devices aren't being manufactured locally, she reported during a late-night briefing in Elara's quarters. The level of technical sophistication and the materials involved suggest production facilities with access to international markets and advanced manufacturing capabilities. Elara studied the technical analysis Dawnecrest had prepared, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. You're saying we're not just fighting local raiders. I'm saying we're fighting someone with resources and technical capabilities equivalent to a nation-state, Dawnecrest replied. And they're testing new weapons on our people before deploying them elsewhere. The realization that her squad was facing enemies far more sophisticated than official intelligence reports suggested sent a chill down Elara's spine. They weren't just hunting common traps. They were engaged in a technological arms race where the stakes were measured in ranger lives. As the spring campaign season intensified, Elara's squad found themselves deployed almost daily, responding to incidents that grew increasingly complex and deadly. Each successful detection added to their reputation, but also painted larger targets on their backs. Enemy forces began specifically targeting ranger units, recognizing their crucial role in disrupting raider operations. The morning that would change everything started like dozens before it. Intelligence reports indicated possible raider activity along a supply route that connected Ravenwatch to smaller outposts in the surrounding valleys. Elara's squad was tasked with clearing the 3-kilometer stretch of road that had been deemed too dangerous for regular patrols. As they prepared their equipment, Elara noticed Redfallow seemed unusually quiet. His usual pre-mission banter was replaced by focused concentration that reminded her of herself before particularly dangerous operations. "What's got you spooked?" she asked while they loaded their crossbows and detection tools onto their horses. "I've been studying the terrain maps of the target area," Redfallow replied. "The layout and road configuration are perfect for a complex ambush. Multiple escape routes for the attackers, clear fields of fire for supporting weapons, and natural choke points that force travelers to slow down." Elara appreciated his analysis. But she also recognized the signs of a soldier who was thinking too much about what could go wrong. Red fallow, fear keeps you alive, but paralysis gets you killed. We've cleared hundreds of traps using the same techniques we'll use today. What she didn't tell him was that her own instincts were screaming warnings about the mission. The intelligence seemed too convenient, the target too obvious, and the timing too perfect. But they had their orders, and ranger convoys needed that route cleared before the next supply run. As their party departed Ravenwatch in the pre-dawn darkness, Elara found herself thinking about her conversation with Captain Mira the night before. Mira's ranger unit would be providing security for the operation, and she had expressed similar concerns about the mission parameters. "Something feels off about this one," Mira had said. "The intelligence is too specific, and the urgency seems artificial. It's like someone wants us in that particular location at that particular time." Elara had agreed, but pointed out that second-guessing every mission would paralyze their operations entirely. They had to trust their training, their equipment, and each other while remaining alert for signs that their assumptions were wrong. Now, as their horses negotiated the winding mountain road toward the target area, Elara reviewed her squad's assignments one final time. Dawncrest would operate the detection equipment, while Red Fallow provided technical analysis and Iron Fist maintained security awareness. Elara would coordinate with Myra's security element and make the final decisions about how to approach any traps they discovered. The sun was just beginning to rise over the mistwood when they reached the designated search area. The road stretched ahead through a narrow valley with steep mountainsides, providing perfect concealment for enemy observers and weapon positions. "Stoneheart, this is Mira." Her voice carried through the communication crystal. "We've got eyes on possible raider movement about 800 meters north of your position. Could be spotters, but they're staying out of bow range." Elara acknowledged the report while studying the terrain through her spyglass. The rocky slopes and sparse vegetation provided countless hiding places for both observers and hidden traps. Standard procedure called for a methodical sweep of the roadway using detection equipment to identify and investigate suspicious objects. But as they began their search, Elara noticed something that made her blood run cold. The road's surface showed signs of recent digging in multiple locations, but the patterns didn't match normal raider trap placement techniques. Instead of single devices positioned to maximize damage to individual targets, the disturbances suggested a coordinated array of traps designed to ensnare and destroy an entire patrol. "Dawncrest, halt the detection," she ordered, her mind racing through the tactical implications. "Red Fallow, I need your assessment of those ground disturbances." "Iron Fist, what's your read on the security situation?" Red Fallow studied the terrain through his scope before responding. "First Ranger, if I was setting up a complex ambush, this is exactly how I'd do it. Multiple devices set to detonate in sequence, creating a kill zone that would trap Rangers and personnel in a crossfire." Iron Fist's report was equally concerning. Communication intercepts suggest coordinated movement by multiple enemy elements. They're using communication discipline that indicates sophisticated planning and execution. Elara felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded combat. But this time it was accompanied by the realization that her squad might be walking into a trap specifically designed to eliminate Ranger specialists. The enemy had studied their procedures and was now using that knowledge against them. "Mira, we need to pull back and reconsider our approach," she radioed to her friend. "This feels like a setup designed to draw us into a kill zone." Mira's response was immediate and professional. "Roger, Stoneheart. We'll establish overwatch positions and call for additional support. Take your time and trust your instincts." As Elara's squad repositioned to a more defensible location, she began developing an alternative plan that would allow them to clear the road without walking into an obvious trap. The enemy might have studied their standard procedures, but they couldn't have anticipated every possible variation. That was when she noticed the communication chatter that would later save all their lives. "First Ranger, we've got a problem." Iron Fist's voice carried the tension of someone trying to remain calm while delivering bad news. He had been monitoring enemy frequencies using equipment that technically wasn't supposed to exist, courtesy of connections he'd maintained from his city guard days. "The chatter I'm picking up suggests they know our exact position and our standard operating procedures. Someone's been feeding them detailed information about Ranger squad tactics." Elara felt the pieces of the puzzle she'd been assembling over the past month suddenly snap into focus with terrifying clarity. The sophisticated trap components Dawnecrest had identified. The tactical awareness Red Fallow had noticed in Raider attack patterns. And now Iron Fist's intelligence intercepts all pointed to the same conclusion. They were facing an enemy that had penetrated Ranger operations at the highest levels. "How detailed?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They know our equipment capabilities, our squad composition, and even our individual specialties," Iron Fist replied, his face pale in the early morning light. "First Ranger, they're talking about the female sergeant who improvises and the young academic with a technical background. They know us personally." The implications hit Elara like a physical blow. Every mission they'd completed, every technique they'd developed, every tactical innovation that had kept them alive was now being used to plan their destruction. The enemy hadn't just been watching, they'd been learning, adapting, and preparing. Dawnecrest's voice broke through her racing thoughts. "First Ranger, the detection equipment is identifying signature patterns consistent with remote triggering systems, but the configurations don't match anything in our field manuals. These traps are using technology we haven't encountered before." Elara studied the detection readings, watching as the equipment painted a picture of the road ahead that defied conventional understanding of Raider trap construction. Instead of individual devices buried at tactical intervals, the entire 3-kilometer stretch appeared to be wired as a single massive trap array. "Red Fallow, give me your worst-case scenario," she ordered. Red Fallow lowered his spyglass, his young face grim with understanding. "If they're using the road surface as a single device, they could bring down the entire valley wall. We're not just looking at casualties, we're looking at complete burial of anyone caught in the kill zone." The tactical picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than Elara's most paranoid assumptions. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a demonstration of capabilities designed to prove that even the best Ranger squads could be outmaneuvered and destroyed by sufficiently motivated and well-informed adversaries. Mira's voice carried through the communication crystal with an urgency that confirmed Elara's fears. "Stoneheart, we've got multiple enemy elements moving into position around your location. This isn't opportunistic harassment. It's a coordinated operation designed to trap your squad in that valley." Elara closed her eyes and forced herself to think beyond the immediate tactical situation. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario, from the original intelligence report that brought them here to the sophisticated trap array that awaited them. The question was whether they could recognize the trap in time to escape it, or if their enemies had anticipated even their ability to adapt. "Squad, we're pulling back to Rally Point Alpha," she announced. "This entire mission is compromised, and we need to reassess our situation from a position of strength." But as their horses began withdrawing from the valley, Elara noticed something that made her stomach drop. The road behind them showed fresh signs of digging that hadn't been there when they'd arrived. While her squad had been focused on the obvious threat ahead, enemy forces had been positioning devices to cut off their retreat. "Mira, we've got a problem," she radioed. "Our egress route has been compromised. We're effectively trapped between 2 trap arrays with enemy forces controlling the high ground." Mira's response was immediate and professional, but Elara could hear the underlying tension. "Roger, Stoneheart. We're calling for immediate aerial support and additional ground forces. Hold your position and prepare for extended operations." As Elara's squad established a defensive perimeter in the narrow valley, She realized they were facing the kind of tactical scenario that the Ranger Academy used as examples of how not to conduct field operations. Every principle of Ranger work emphasized avoiding exactly this kind of situation, trapped in an enclosed area with limited options and known enemy capabilities. But Elara Stoneheart hadn't survived 3 campaign seasons by following textbook solutions to textbook problems. She had built her reputation by finding unconventional approaches to impossible situations, and this morning would either validate that reputation or end it permanently. Dawnecrest, I need you to reprogram the detection equipment for a reconnaissance mission instead of trap identification, she ordered. We need to understand the full scope of what we're facing before we can develop a response. Dawnecrest's academic background proved invaluable as she modified the detection software to focus on mapping the trap arrays rather than simply identifying individual devices. What they discovered challenged every assumption about radar capabilities and resources. The enemy had effectively turned the entire valley into a single weapon using commercially available explosives, connected by a sophisticated network of triggers that could be activated from multiple locations. The level of coordination and technical expertise required for such an operation suggested enemy capabilities far beyond what intelligence reports had indicated. First Ranger, this isn't just about killing our squad, Dawnecrest observed as she analyzed the detection data. This is a demonstration of technological and tactical capabilities designed to send a message to Ranger forces throughout the kingdom. Redfallow nodded grimly. They're proving they can outthink and outmaneuver our best people using our own procedures against us. Every other Ranger squad is going to have to assume their standard operating procedures are compromised. Iron Fist's communication intercepts confirmed their analysis. Enemy communications indicated this operation was being observed and evaluated by representatives from multiple raider groups, effectively turning Elara's squad into unwilling participants in a tactical demonstration. So we're not just fighting for our lives, Elara said quietly. We're fighting to prevent every other Ranger squad from facing the same situation. The weight of that responsibility settled over the squad like a physical burden. They weren't just Rangers trying to survive a tactical emergency. They had become symbols of Ranger capability in the face of evolving enemy threats. As enemy forces continued positioning themselves around the valley, Elara began developing a plan that would either save her squad or ensure their deaths served a strategic purpose. The enemy had studied Ranger tactics and procedures, but they might not have anticipated the kind of desperate innovation that emerged when conventional approaches failed. Here's what we're going to do, she announced, gathering her squad around a map of the valley. We're going to give them exactly what they expect, right up until the moment we do something they've never seen before. The plan she outlined was dangerous, unconventional, and relied on techniques that weren't covered in any Ranger manual. But it was also the kind of tactical thinking that had earned Elara her reputation as a Ranger who found solutions where others saw only problems. Dawnecrest would use the detection equipment to simulate standard Ranger approach procedures, drawing enemy attention and triggering responses that would reveal the exact locations and capabilities of their surveillance and control systems. Redfallow would provide overwatch and analysis, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's defensive positions. Iron Fist would coordinate with Myra's security element to ensure their actions appeared to follow standard protocols while actually implementing Elara's unconventional approach. The key is making them believe we're following predictable patterns while we're actually gathering intelligence for a response they won't anticipate, Elara explained. They've studied our procedures, but they haven't studied us. As they implemented the first phase of her plan, Elara reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in Ocalo, she had learned early that survival often required appearing to conform while actually finding creative ways around seemingly impossible obstacles. The Rangers had refined those instincts into tactical skills, but the underlying principle remained the same when the system worked against you. You found ways to make the system work for you. The detection equipment's approach toward the first trap array triggered exactly the response Elara had predicted. Enemy forces revealed their positions as they prepared to activate the devices, providing Iron Fist with the intelligence he needed to map their command and control structure. "They're using a hierarchical trigger system," he reported. "Primary controller about 600 meters northeast with backup positions at 400-meter intervals. Take out the primary controller and we can disrupt the entire array." But reaching the primary controller would require crossing terrain that was certainly under enemy observation and probably defended by additional weapon positions. Standard Ranger tactics would call for aerial support or artillery to suppress enemy positions before attempting such a movement. Elara studied the terrain through her spyglass, looking for alternatives that might not be obvious to an enemy that had studied Ranger tactical procedures. The valley's configuration included several natural features that could provide concealment, but only if her squad was willing to accept risks that violated standard operating procedures. "Red Fallow, what's your assessment of the drainage system that runs along the valley floor?" she asked. Red Fallow studied the area she indicated before responding. "It's probably deep enough for concealed movement, but it would put us below ground level with limited visibility and no easy egress if things go wrong." "Perfect," Elara replied, surprising her squad with her enthusiasm for what seemed like a tactical nightmare. "They've planned for us to behave rationally. Time to disappoint them." As they prepared to implement the next phase of her plan, Elara noticed that her squad's initial nervousness was being replaced by the focused determination that emerged when Rangers realized their survival depended on perfect execution of an imperfect plan. Dawncrist had finished reprogramming the detection equipment for a mission that would either disable the enemy's command structure or provide enough distraction for the squad to escape the valley. Red Fallow had identified 3 possible routes that would allow them to approach the enemy positions without following predictable patterns. Iron Fist had established communication protocols that would coordinate their actions with Myra's Overwatch element. But as they prepared to move, Elara received a crystal communication that changed everything about their tactical situation. "Stoneheart, this is Captain Thorne." The outpost commander's voice carried unusual urgency. "We've identified the source of the intelligence leaks. You need to assume all previous operational security protocols are compromised, including your current communications." The implications hit Elara immediately. If their crystal communications were compromised, the enemy might be listening to their tactical planning in real time. Everything they had discussed, every plan they had developed, every weakness they had identified might already be known to their adversaries. But instead of panic, Elara felt the cold clarity that had sustained her through countless dangerous situations. The enemy's greatest strength, their detailed knowledge of Ranger procedures, had just become their greatest weakness. "Squad, new plan," she announced, switching to hand signals they had developed for situations where communication couldn't be trusted. "We're going to assume they're listening to everything and use that against them." What she proposed next would either demonstrate the kind of tactical innovation that kept Ranger forces ahead of their enemies or provide a cautionary tale about the dangers of improvisation in combat. But as Elara looked at her squad's faces, she saw the same determination that had carried her through 3 campaign seasons and dozens of impossible situations. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the future of Ranger operations throughout the borderlands. Every technique they developed, every tactical innovation they demonstrated, would either strengthen or weaken the capabilities of every Ranger squad that followed. The enemy had studied Ranger procedures and planned accordingly. Now it was time to show them what happened when Rangers stopped following procedures and started writing new ones. Elara's plan required her squad to split up, violating every principle of small unit tactics she had learned during 3 campaign seasons. But conventional tactics had brought them into this trap, and conventional thinking wouldn't get them out alive. Dawncrist, you're going to take the detection equipment and execute a standard approach to the primary array. Elara signaled using the hand signals they had developed. Make it look textbook perfect. I want them convinced we're following predictable patterns. Dawn-Crest nodded, understanding that her role was to serve as both bait and distraction while the rest of the squad maneuvered into positions the enemy wouldn't anticipate. Her academic background had taught her to think systematically about problems, but combat was teaching her that sometimes the most important thing was making your enemy think systematically while you acted chaotically. Red Fallow would provide overwatch from a position that violated standard scout doctrine, but offered angles of observation that enemy forces probably hadn't considered. His rural background had taught him to use terrain in ways that ranger manuals didn't cover, finding concealment in places where conventional wisdom said none existed. Iron Fist would coordinate with Myra's security element, using communication protocols that appeared normal while actually conveying coded information about enemy positions and capabilities. His city guard experience had taught him that the most effective surveillance often looked completely routine to anyone who didn't understand what they were actually observing. But Elara reserved the most dangerous task for herself. While her squad executed their assigned roles, she would move through the drainage system Red Fallow had identified, using terrain features to approach the enemy command position from a direction they couldn't possibly have prepared for. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution, but it also required something more fundamental: the willingness to trust each other completely while operating under conditions where a single mistake would kill everyone. As they began implementing the first phase, Elara felt the familiar combination of fear and excitement that preceded her most challenging missions. Every successful ranger operation required balancing calculated risks against potential rewards, but this situation pushed that calculation into territory she had never explored. Dawn-Crest's detection equipment approached the first trap array with textbook precision, following procedures that had been refined through hundreds of successful missions. But Elara knew the enemy was watching every movement, analyzing every decision, looking for patterns they could exploit. Through her spyglass, she could see enemy observers tracking the equipment's progress from concealed positions along the ridgeline. Their discipline was impressive: no unnecessary movement, no premature reactions, no signs of the kind of tactical impatience that usually characterized raider operations. "These aren't typical raiders," Red Fallow's voice whispered through their secure communication system. "Watch how they're coordinating their observation posts. That's military-level tactical discipline." Elara had reached the same conclusion, but hearing it confirmed by Red Fallow's tactical analysis added another layer of complexity to their situation. They weren't just facing an enemy that had studied ranger procedures. They were facing an enemy with formal military training and experience. As she entered the drainage system that would provide concealed approach to the enemy command position, Elara reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent her ranger career developing expertise in trap detection and disarming, but now her survival depended on conventional infiltration tactics that her specialized training had never emphasized. The drainage channel was deeper than Red Fallow's initial assessment had suggested, providing better concealment, but also creating new tactical challenges. The stone walls channeled sound in unexpected ways, making it difficult to determine the location and distance of enemy positions based on audio cues alone. Moving through the murky water that flowed along the bottom of the channel, Elara used techniques she had learned during urban operations training in the capital. Each step had to be placed carefully to avoid creating noise that would reveal her position, and her movement rate was limited by the need to constantly assess threats from multiple directions. Above ground, Dawn-Crest's detection equipment continued its methodical approach to the first trap array, providing the kind of predictable distraction that Elara's plan required. Through her earpiece, she could hear the subtle changes in enemy communications that indicated their full attention was focused on the detection equipment's activities. Target is following standard approach protocols. An enemy voice reported in accented common. Estimate 12 minutes until device interaction. All positions maintain observation discipline. The enemy's use of common and their detailed knowledge of ranger timing confirmed Elara's suspicions about the sophisticated nature of the threat they were facing. This wasn't just about defeating a single squad, it was about demonstrating capabilities that would force ranger forces to completely reconsider their operational assumptions. As she reached the halfway point of her approach, Elara encountered an obstacle that threatened to derail her entire plan. The drainage system was blocked by debris from recent flooding, forcing her to either abandon her concealed route or expose herself by climbing out of the channel. She studied the terrain around the blockage, looking for alternatives that wouldn't compromise her mission. The sides of the drainage channel were steep but climbable, leading to areas of sparse vegetation that might provide enough concealment for a short overland movement. Making the decision to proceed, Elara climbed out of the channel and began moving through the scrub brush that dotted the valley floor. Every step carried the risk of detection, but stopping would guarantee her squad's destruction when the enemy activated their trap array. Through his scope, Red Fallow was tracking her movement while simultaneously maintaining observation of enemy positions. His discipline was perfect: no unnecessary communications, no movement that would draw attention to his position, no signs of the tactical impatience that could compromise the entire operation. "Overwatch has eyes on target movement," he reported using coded language that would be meaningless to enemy listeners. "Package delivery on schedule." Iron Fist's coordination with Mira's security element was equally professional, using routine administrative communications to convey tactical intelligence that painted a detailed picture of enemy capabilities and intentions. "Base, this is Field Unit. Equipment maintenance proceeding normally. Estimate 30 minutes for completion of scheduled activities," Iron Fist reported, actually informing Ravenwatch that enemy forces were positioned for a coordinated attack in approximately 30 minutes. But it was Dawnecrest's performance that impressed Elara most. Despite being the youngest and least experienced member of the squad, she was executing detection operations with the kind of precision and tactical awareness that usually took years to develop. The equipment's sensors were providing detailed intelligence about the trap array's construction, while Dawnecrest's analysis revealed weaknesses in the enemy's trigger system that could be exploited if they could reach the primary command position. "Maintenance supervisor, equipment is functioning within normal parameters, but I'm detecting some irregularities in the control systems," Dawnecrest reported, using technical language to describe the enemy's command structure. "Recommend immediate supervisor consultation." Elara smiled despite the danger of her situation. Dawnecrest was telling her that the enemy's trigger system had vulnerabilities that could be exploited, but only if Elara could reach the command position and disable the primary controller. As she approached the ridgeline where enemy observers were positioned, Elara drew on lessons learned during countless training exercises and combat operations. The key to tactical movement wasn't avoiding all risk. It was managing risk in ways that your enemy couldn't predict or counter. The final 50 meters of her approach required crossing open ground that offered no concealment from enemy observation posts. Standard ranger tactics would call this movement impossible without supporting fire or diversionary actions. But Elara had learned that impossible was often just another word for unexpected. Instead of trying to avoid detection, she decided to move during a moment when enemy attention would naturally be focused elsewhere. Dawnecrest's detection equipment was approaching the most dangerous part of its mission, requiring full concentration from enemy observers to ensure their trigger timing was perfect. Elara waited until the equipment reached the primary trap device, then began her final approach during the critical seconds when enemy attention was completely focused on their target. Her movement was fast, direct, and completely contrary to the careful, methodical approach that Ranger Doctrine recommended for such situations. The gamble worked. By the time enemy observers realized someone was approaching their command position, Elara was already close enough to engage with her bow before they could activate the trigger system that would destroy her squad. But as she raised her weapon to engage the first enemy position, Elara realized that her assumptions about the enemy's tactical setup were dangerously incomplete. The command position she had identified was actually a decoy designed to draw exactly the kind of flanking attack she was attempting. The real command position was located 50 meters further up the ridgeline, protected by additional security elements that she hadn't detected during her initial reconnaissance. Worse, her approach had been observed and reported, meaning the enemy now knew that Ranger forces were capable of the kind of tactical innovation that their planning hadn't anticipated. All positions, Ranger element has penetrated perimeter security, an enemy voice reported with professional calm. Initiate contingency protocol. Detonate secondary arrays on my command. Elara realized that her tactical innovation had actually accelerated the enemy's timeline rather than disrupting it. Instead of waiting for her squad to approach the primary trap array, they were now preparing to detonate backup devices that would achieve the same strategic objective while eliminating the threat her flanking movement represented. As enemy forces moved to engage her position, Elara found herself facing the kind of tactical situation that defined Ranger careers, a moment when success or failure would be determined by decisions made under extreme pressure with incomplete information. She could attempt to withdraw and rejoin her squad, accepting that their mission had failed but preserving their lives for future operations. She could continue her attack on the real command position, knowing that success was unlikely but might disrupt enemy plans enough to save other Ranger forces. Or she could do something that hadn't occurred to either her squad or her enemies, something that would either demonstrate why Elara Stoneheart had earned her reputation as a Ranger who found solutions to impossible problems, or provide a final example of what happened when improvisation exceeded tactical reality. Looking down at her squad's position in the valley below, Elara saw Dawnecrest's detection equipment approaching the moment when enemy forces would trigger their trap array. Red Fallow and Iron Fist were maintaining their assigned positions, but their tactical options were limited by the enemy's control of the high ground and superior numbers. Mira's security element was positioned to provide supporting fire, but they were too far away to affect the immediate tactical situation. Aerial support was at least 20 minutes away, and ground reinforcements were even more distant. In that moment, Elara Stoneheart made the decision that would define not only her Ranger career, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. Instead of following any tactical doctrine or predetermined plan, she decided to create a new solution based on her unique combination of skills, experience, and desperate creativity. The plan that formed in her mind was so unconventional that it would either be studied in the Ranger Academy as an example of tactical innovation or dismissed as the kind of desperate improvisation that had no place in professional military operations. But as Elara began implementing her new plan, she felt the cold confidence that had sustained her through 3 campaign seasons and dozens of life-or-death decisions. She wasn't just fighting for her squad's survival, she was fighting to prove that Rangers could adapt and overcome any threat, no matter how sophisticated or well-prepared. The enemy had studied Ranger tactics and developed countermeasures for every standard response. Now they were about to discover what happened when a Ranger stopped following standard responses and started writing new ones in real time. As she moved toward the real enemy command position, Elara keyed her communication crystal for what might be her final message to her squad. Dawnecrest, Red Fallow, Iron Fist, execute Emergency Protocol 7 in 30 seconds. Trust me and be ready for anything. Emergency Protocol 7 didn't exist in any manual or training program. It was Elara's code for telling her squad to prepare for the kind of tactical improvisation that would either save all their lives or end them together. Emergency Protocol 7 meant one thing: abandon all standard procedures and follow Elara's lead, no matter how insane her actions might appear. It was the tactical equivalent of a desperate gambit, reserved for situations where conventional approaches had failed and survival depended on doing something no one expected. Dawnecrest immediately understood the implications. She redirected the detection equipment away from the explosive array it had been approaching, instead sending it toward a secondary position that would provide overwatch of Elara's approach to the enemy command position. The movement violated every principle of Ranger operations, but it would give Elara the tactical support she needed for whatever desperate plan she was implementing. Red Fallow shifted his observation from defensive overwatch to offensive targeting, identifying enemy positions that could threaten Elara's flanking movement. His rural hunting instincts had taught him to track prey in terrain where visibility was limited and targets were scarce skills that translated perfectly to combat operations. Iron Fist ceased his administrative communications with Ravenwatch and began coordinating directly with Myra's security element, preparing them for immediate action despite their distance from the main engagement area. His city guard experience had taught him that tactical situations could change in seconds, requiring instant adaptation and flawless execution. But Elara's plan required more than just tactical coordination. It required her squad to trust her judgment even when they couldn't understand her reasoning. As she approached the real enemy command position, she was developing a solution that combined trap disarming techniques with infiltration tactics in ways that no training program had ever contemplated. The enemy command position was located in a natural depression that provided excellent concealment and fields of fire, but also created vulnerabilities that experienced Ranger scouts would recognize. The same terrain features that protected the position from direct assault also channeled explosive effects in predictable ways. Elara studied the enemy position through her spyglass, noting the placement of personnel, equipment, and defensive measures. The command position included sophisticated communication equipment and trigger devices for controlling the explosive arrays. But it was manned by personnel who were focused on managing the complex technical operation, rather than defending against close assault. Red Fallow, I need precise range and wind data for a 45-degree upward trajectory from my current position, she whispered into her crystal, using technical language that would sound routine to enemy listeners. Red Fallow's response came immediately. Range 420 meters, wind negligible. Elevation angle confirms feasibility for standard operations. What Red Fallow was actually telling her was that a crossbow bolt fired from her current position could reach the enemy command post if she could achieve the proper trajectory and timing. It was a desperate solution that required perfect execution, but it was also the kind of unexpected approach that might succeed precisely because it was so unconventional. Elara checked her equipment, confirming that she still carried the specialized explosive bolts that were standard issue for trap disruption operations. She had fired thousands of practice shots during training, but never under conditions where a single miss would result in her squad's destruction. As she prepared for what might be the most important shot of her Ranger career, Elara reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in Ocala, she had learned to shoot accurately by necessity. Hitting targets with arrows had sometimes meant the difference between her village eating or going hungry. The Rangers had refined those childhood skills into military capabilities, teaching her to use crossbows as tools for both offensive operations and trap disarmament. But no training exercise had ever required her to make a precision shot under combat conditions, while enemy forces were actively trying to kill her. Dawnecrest's detection equipment reached its new position and began providing the overwatch support Elara needed. Through the equipment sensors, Dawnecrest could observe enemy movements and provide real-time intelligence about their activities and defensive preparations. Supervisor, maintenance equipment is in position and providing full diagnostic capabilities, Dawnecrest reported, telling Elara that the detection equipment was ready to support her attack. Red Fallow had identified 3 enemy positions that could engage Elara during her approach, but his own position allowed him to provide suppressive fire that would limit their effectiveness. His analysis of wind and terrain conditions confirmed that Elara's shot was tactically feasible, though success would require perfect execution under combat stress. Iron Fist's coordination with Mira's security element had prepared them to provide supporting fire the moment Elara's attack began. Though they were too distant to affect the immediate tactical situation, their presence would prevent enemy reinforcements from responding to Elara's assault. But as Elara prepared to begin her final approach, she received intelligence that changed the entire tactical picture. Iron Fist's monitoring of enemy communications revealed that the command position she was preparing to attack was about to relocate to an alternate site. All stations, primary control is moving to secondary position in 5 minutes. An enemy voice reported with professional efficiency. Maintain observation discipline during transition. Elara realized that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If the enemy command element moved to their backup position, her squad would lose their only chance to disrupt the trap array before it was detonated. Worse, the new position might be located where her crossbow attack wouldn't be feasible. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, Elara decided to attack immediately, accepting the increased risks in exchange for tactical surprise. Her approach would be faster and more direct than originally planned, but it would also be more dangerous and less likely to succeed. As she began moving toward the enemy position, Elara felt the familiar combination of fear and determination that had sustained her through countless dangerous situations. Every step carried the risk of detection and immediate engagement by enemy forces, but stopping would guarantee her squad's destruction. The terrain between her current position and the enemy command post offered limited concealment, forcing her to move in short rushes between patches of cover. Each movement required careful timing to avoid enemy observation periods, and her progress was slower than the tactical situation demanded. Through her earpiece, she could hear her squad's professional communications as they provided support for her attack. Dawncrest was using the detection equipment to create diversions that drew enemy attention away from Elara's approach. Red Fallow was providing precise intelligence about enemy movements and defensive measures. Iron Fist was coordinating with external support elements to ensure Elara's attack would be supported by all available resources. But it was Myra's voice that provided the encouragement Elara needed as she prepared for the final phase of her assault. "Stoneheart, this is Myra. Whatever you're planning, we're ready to support. Trust your instincts and do what you do best." As Elara reached the final covered position before her crossbow shot, she took a moment to assess the tactical situation one last time. The enemy command position was exactly where Red Fallow's analysis had indicated, with personnel and equipment arranged in patterns that confirmed their focus on technical operations rather than close defense. The distance and elevation angle were within the parameters she had calculated, but combat conditions would affect her accuracy in ways that training exercises couldn't replicate. Enemy fire, physical stress, and time pressure would all influence her ability to make the precise shot that success required. Elara readied her special explosive bolt and prepared to make the shot that would either save her squad or provide a final demonstration of what happened when desperate courage met tactical reality. As she rose from her concealed position, enemy observers immediately detected her movement and began engaging with bow fire. The first bolt left her crossbow with perfect form and trajectory, arcing through the morning air toward the enemy command position. But as it flew toward its target, Elara realized that her tactical calculations had been based on incomplete information about the enemy's defensive preparations. The command position included overhead cover that she hadn't detected during her reconnaissance, meaning her bolt would detonate above the target rather than inside it. The explosion would cause casualties and disruption, but it wouldn't disable the communications equipment or prevent the enemy from detonating their explosive array. As enemy return fire forced her back into cover, Elara realized that her attack had achieved tactical surprise, but failed to accomplish its strategic objective. The enemy command structure was damaged but still functional, and her position was now known to all enemy forces in the area. But instead of despair, Elara felt the cold anger that had sustained her through every impossible situation she had ever faced. The enemy had prepared for conventional attacks and standard procedures, but they hadn't prepared for a ranger who refused to accept failure as a final answer. Loading a second explosive bolt, Elara began planning an attack that would either complete her mission or ensure that her sacrifice served a meaningful purpose. This time she would use techniques that no ranger manual had ever described, combining trap disarming knowledge with infiltration tactics in ways that would either save her squad or provide a final lesson about the costs of tactical innovation. As she prepared for what might be her final attack, Elara Stoneheart reflected on the journey that had brought her from the forests of Okalo to a mountainside in the borderlands, facing enemies who had studied every aspect of ranger capabilities except the most important one, the willingness of individual rangers to exceed every reasonable expectation of human performance when the lives of their teammates depended on their actions. The enemy had planned for everything except the possibility that a ranger would refuse to accept the tactical limitations they had imposed. Now they were about to discover what happened when planning met the kind of desperate innovation that emerged from 3 campaign seasons and a lifetime of overcoming impossible odds. Elara's second attack would either demonstrate why she had earned her reputation as a ranger who found solutions to unsolvable problems, or provide a final example of what rangers were willing to sacrifice for each other and their mission. As enemy fire intensified around her position, Elara prepared to prove that the most dangerous thing an enemy could face wasn't ranger technology or tactics. It was a ranger who had decided that failure wasn't an acceptable option. The second bolt's explosion echoed across the valley like thunder, but Elara knew immediately that it also failed to disable the enemy command position. Through the smoke and debris, she could see enemy personnel regrouping and maintaining control of their communications equipment. Her desperate assault had caused casualties and confusion, but it hadn't achieved the tactical objective her squad's survival required. Enemy return fire was now concentrated on her position with deadly accuracy, forcing her to remain behind cover that was rapidly being degraded by sustained bow fire. Rocky fragments and metal splinters filled the air around her, and she could feel the impact vibrations as arrows struck the boulder that provided her only protection. "Stoneheart, report your status." Redfellow's voice carried the tension of someone watching his squad leader come under effective enemy fire. From his overwatch position, he could see Elara's tactical situation deteriorating rapidly as enemy forces maneuvered to surround her position. "I'm pinned down but mobile," Elara replied, though mobility was rapidly becoming theoretical as enemy fire intensified. "Execute Contingency Plan Delta. Get the squad out of here." Contingency Plan Delta was her code for tactical withdrawal without her plan none of her squad members had any intention of implementing. Instead of retreating, Dawnecrest began maneuvering the detection equipment toward Elara's position to provide covering fire and tactical support. Negative on Delta. Dawnecrest's voice carried the firm determination of someone who had decided that abandoning teammates wasn't an acceptable option. "We're coming to get you." But as Dawnecrest's equipment approached Elara's position, enemy forces revealed capabilities that intelligence reports had completely failed to identify. Instead of just bows and traditional weapons, they deployed an explosive device specifically designed to disable ranger detection equipment. The explosion that disabled Dawnecrest's equipment also revealed the true scope of the trap Elara's squad had walked into. This wasn't just about testing new explosive technologies or demonstrating tactical capabilities. It was about capturing or killing specific Ranger personnel whose expertise posed strategic threats to enemy operations. All stations, priority target is isolated and vulnerable. An enemy voice reported with professional satisfaction. Initiate capture protocol. Command wants the female squad leader alive for interrogation. The implications of that transmission struck Elara like a physical blow. The enemy hadn't just studied her squad's procedures, they had studied her personally, identifying her as a high-value target whose capture would provide strategic intelligence about Ranger capabilities. Red Fallow's analysis confirmed her fears. First Ranger, they're moving to surround your position with capture equipment. This entire operation was designed to take you alive. The tactical picture was now completely clear, and it was worse than Elara's most paranoid assumptions. Enemy forces had orchestrated an elaborate scenario to capture an experienced Ranger specialist who could provide detailed information about Ranger techniques, equipment capabilities, and operational procedures. Iron Fist's intelligence intercepts revealed additional details that painted an even grimmer picture. Stoneheart, they're talking about ransoming you back to Ranger forces in exchange for tactical concessions. This isn't just about intelligence. It's about demonstrating they can capture our best people whenever they want. As enemy forces continued their approach, Elara realized that her capture would compromise not just her own squad, but every Ranger unit operating in the borderlands. The techniques she had developed, the innovation she had implemented, and the tactical knowledge she had accumulated over 3 campaign seasons would all become weapons in enemy hands. Looking down at the valley where her squad was positioned, Elara saw Dawncrest, Redfellow, and Iron Fist preparing to attempt a rescue operation that would almost certainly result in all their deaths. Their loyalty was absolute, but their tactical options were limited by the enemy's superior numbers and advantageous positions. Mira's security element was moving to provide support, but they were too distant to affect the immediate tactical situation. Aerial support remained 20 minutes away, and ground reinforcements were even more distant. Elara's squad was effectively alone, facing an enemy force that had prepared specifically for this encounter. But as Elara assessed her tactical situation, she noticed something that enemy planners might not have anticipated. Her position on the ridge line provided her with direct observation of the primary explosive array that threatened her squad. And her Ranger training had taught her to recognize vulnerabilities in even the most sophisticated devices. The enemy's trigger system was designed to be activated from the command position she had been attacking, but it also included backup systems that could be activated by secondary controllers. More importantly, the entire array appeared to be connected by a network of wires and electronic components that followed predictable engineering principles. Elara studied the trap array through her spyglass, applying 3 seasons' worth of experience in identifying and defeating traps. What she saw confirmed a possibility that might save her squad, even if it cost her own life. The enemy had made the array too sophisticated for its own good, instead of simple devices that could be triggered independently. They had created a complex system that was vulnerable to cascade failures if key components were damaged or destroyed. But exploiting that vulnerability would require her to expose herself to direct enemy fire while attempting to hit specific targets at maximum range with her remaining explosive bolts. Success would require the kind of precision shooting that she had never attempted under combat conditions, and failure would result in her capture and her squad's destruction. As enemy forces closed on her position, Elara made the calculation that would define the rest of her Ranger career. Instead of allowing herself to be captured or attempting to escape, she would use her final moments of freedom to attack the explosive array directly, creating the kind of cascade failure that would disable the entire system. "Squad, this is Stoneheart," she radioed, using clear language because tactical deception was no longer possible. "I'm going to attack the primary array directly. When I do, you'll have approximately 30 seconds to clear the valley before secondary explosions begin." Redfellow's response was immediate and predictable. "First Ranger, that's suicide. The range is too great, and you'll be completely exposed to enemy fire." "Maybe," Elara replied, checking her remaining explosive bolts and calculating distances and trajectories. "But it's also the only way to ensure you get out of here alive." Dawn-Crest's voice carried the professional calm she had learned from watching Elara handle impossible situations. "First Ranger, if you're determined to do this, let us provide supporting fire to improve your chances." Iron Fist's tactical analysis was equally professional. "First Ranger, if you wait 60 seconds, Myra's element will be in position to provide suppressive fire during your attack." But Elara knew that waiting 60 seconds would allow enemy forces to reach her position and eliminate her ability to make the attack entirely. This was one of those tactical situations where success required immediate action, regardless of the personal costs involved. As she prepared for what might be her final Ranger action, Elara reflected on the conversation she'd had with Myra about sharing her gifts instead of just using them. In a few moments, she would either demonstrate the kind of tactical innovation that kept Ranger forces ahead of their enemies, or provide a final lesson about what happened when improvisation exceeded tactical reality. Loading her third explosive bolt, Elara began the mental calculations that would determine whether her sacrifice served a meaningful purpose. Distance to target, wind conditions, elevation angle, and timing all had to be perfect for her attack to succeed in disabling the explosive array. But as she prepared to expose herself to enemy fire for what might be the last time, Elara realized that her tactical situation included one element that enemy planners couldn't have anticipated. The injury to her right arm from the earlier attack had forced her to adapt her shooting technique in ways that might actually improve her accuracy under these specific conditions. She would need to fire her crossbow with her left hand alone, her non-dominant hand. It was a technique the Rangers never taught, considered impossible by conventional doctrine. But necessity had forced her to develop ambidextrous shooting skills during her early days as a village hunter, when injuries were common and failing to bring back food wasn't an option. Now that same adaptability might provide the tactical advantage her mission required. As enemy forces reached the final approach to her position, Elara Stoneheart prepared to prove that the most dangerous enemy any force could face was a Ranger, who had decided that mission accomplishment was more important than personal survival. The shot she was about to attempt would either save her squad and demonstrate why Rangers remain tactically superior to any enemy, or provide a final example of what happened when courage exceeded tactical possibility. Either way, Elara Stoneheart was about to show her enemies what they had unleashed when they decided to target Rangers who had learned that impossible was just another word for challenging. Enemy voices were now clearly audible as they coordinated their final approach, but Elara felt the cold calm that had sustained her through 3 campaign seasons and dozens of life-or-death decisions. She wasn't just fighting for her squad's survival, she was fighting to prove that Rangers could overcome any threat through a combination of training, courage, and the kind of desperate innovation that emerged when failure wasn't an acceptable option. As she rose from cover for what might be her final attack, Elara Stoneheart discovered that everything she had learned about trap disarmament, infiltration tactics, and human determination was about to be tested in ways that no training program could have prepared her for. For a heartbeat, she thought about the crossbow in her hands, her trustworthy weapon that had saved her life countless times before. Then, with a clarity that came only in moments of absolute crisis, she realized the truth. The crossbow itself was not the weapon that would save her squad today. In a move that would later become legendary throughout the Ranger Corps, Elara did the unthinkable. Rather than fire the explosive bolt at the enemy's trap array, she turned and threw her entire crossbow, primed with the explosive bolt, directly at the command center's main trigger mechanism. The enemy forces froze in momentary confusion at the sight of a Ranger throwing away her primary weapon. That split second of hesitation was all Elara needed, The heavy crossbow tumbled through the air, its trajectory perfect despite the unconventional delivery. When it struck the command center's main control device, the impact triggered both the crossbow's firing mechanism and the explosive bolt. The resulting chain reaction was spectacular. The explosion not only destroyed the primary command center, but sent cascading failures throughout the entire trap network. Secondary explosions ripped through the valley, but in a pattern that created escape routes rather than killing zones. The enemy's sophisticated system, designed to trap and kill rangers, had become the instrument of their own destruction. "All squad members evacuate now," Elara shouted into her communication crystal as she began a desperate sprint down the ridge. The tactical gamble had worked better than she could have hoped, but it had also placed her in the center of what was rapidly becoming a firestorm of uncontrolled detonations. Dawnecrest, Red Fallow, and Iron Fist executed a perfect tactical withdrawal, using the confusion created by Elara's unprecedented attack to break contact and reach defensible positions. Mira's security element provided covering fire as they retreated, while aerial support arrived just in time to suppress the remaining enemy forces who were attempting to regroup. Against all odds, Elara managed to navigate through the chaos of cascading explosions and reach her squad at the rally point. Her right arm hung useless at her side, and fresh wounds from enemy fire and flying debris had added to her collection of scars. But she was alive, and more importantly, so was her entire squad. 6 months later, the Ranger training facility at Highkeep buzzed with the controlled activity of a military outpost where warriors came to learn and adapt to new realities. Elara Stoneheart sat in the archery range, working with her left hand to perfect the crossbow techniques that had saved her squad in the Borderlands, while her right arm remained partially impaired despite multiple healing sessions. The injuries from that morning in the valley had altered her career as an active ranger specialist, but they had also launched her into a new role that no one had anticipated. The techniques she had developed for left-handed crossbow operations were now being studied and refined by ranger training programs throughout the kingdom. "The thing about adaptation," she explained to the class of young rangers who had gathered to learn from her experience, "is that it's not just about overcoming limitations. It's about discovering capabilities you never knew you had." The students listened with the intense attention of people who understood that the lessons Elara was teaching might save their lives in future operations. Her reputation had grown far beyond her original specialty, encompassing tactical innovation, leadership under extreme pressure, and the kind of problem-solving that emerged when conventional approaches failed. Lyra Dawnecrest, the former recruit who had operated the detection equipment during that desperate morning, was now completing her advanced studies in magical engineering while serving as Elara's research partner. Their collaboration was developing new technologies that would make Ranger operations safer and more effective for future generations of warriors. The weapon-throwing technique First Ranger Stoneheart developed has applications beyond just combat situations, Dawnecrest explained during their joint presentation to Ranger leadership. "We're adapting the principles for equipment designs that can operate effectively even when primary systems are compromised." Red Fallow had been promoted to squad leader and was now training new Ranger teams using lessons learned from his experience in the Borderlands to prepare warriors for threats that traditional training programs hadn't anticipated. His ability to think like a raider trap setter had proven invaluable for developing countermeasures against increasingly sophisticated enemy devices. Iron Fist had returned to the capital as an instructor, but maintained his Ranger connections as a consultant on issues involving the intersection of criminal investigation and military intelligence. His analysis of the security breach that had compromised their mission had led to significant improvements in operational security protocols throughout the Ranger Corps. But it was during a ceremony at the Royal Palace that Elara truly understood the broader implications of what had happened that morning in the valley. Standing before an audience that included senior Ranger leadership, intelligence officials, and wounded veterans. She received the kingdom's highest honor for her actions in destroying the enemy trap array and saving not only her squad, but potentially dozens of other units that might have faced similar threats. First Ranger Stoneheart demonstrated the kind of tactical innovation and personal courage that exemplifies the best traditions of the King's Rangers. The citation read, "Her willingness to adapt standard procedures to meet unprecedented challenges, combined with her absolute commitment to her teammates' safety, represents the highest ideals of service to the realm." But the formal recognition, while meaningful, was less important to Elara than the knowledge that her experience was being used to train and protect other Rangers. The tactical lessons learned from that desperate morning were now part of standard Ranger training, and the intelligence gathered from the destroyed enemy positions had prevented similar operations throughout the region. During the reception following the ceremony, Elara found herself in conversation with Captain Thorne, who had flown in from Ravenwatch specifically to attend the event. His perspective on the strategic implications of her actions provided context that she hadn't fully appreciated while living through the tactical situation. "What you and your squad discovered that morning changed our entire understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions," Thorne explained. "The sophistication of their planning and the extent of their intelligence penetration forced us to completely reconsider our operational security and tactical procedures." The investigation that followed Elara's mission had revealed a network of enemy intelligence operations that extended far beyond the borderlands, involving foreign military advisors and sophisticated technological support that previous assessments had failed to identify. The intelligence Elara's squad had gathered, both through their tactical innovations and their successful defense, had disrupted enemy operations throughout the region. But perhaps most importantly, Elara's example had inspired a new generation of Rangers to think beyond conventional tactical solutions when facing unprecedented challenges. Her willingness to abandon standard procedures and create new approaches in real time had become a case study in the Ranger Academy and professional development programs. Captain Mira, now promoted to commander and leading a Ranger battalion, had traveled from the eastern borderlands to attend the ceremony. During a quiet moment between official events, she and Elara reflected on the conversation they had shared months earlier about the importance of sharing gifts rather than just using them. "You've done more than just survive an impossible situation," Mira observed. "You've created a legacy that will protect and inspire Rangers for generations to come." Elara appreciated the recognition, but her mind was already focused on future challenges and opportunities. The injury to her right arm had forced her to discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed, and she was determined to continue that process of adaptation and innovation in her new role as an instructor and researcher. The program she was developing at the Ranger Academy would teach not just the technical aspects of trap disarmament, but the kind of tactical thinking that allowed Rangers to create new solutions when conventional approaches failed. Students would learn to operate effectively with both hands, to think creatively under pressure, and to maintain mission focus even when everything seemed to be going wrong. But the most important lesson Elara wanted to convey was something that couldn't be taught through formal instruction: the understanding that limitations were often just starting points for innovation, and that the most dangerous enemies any force could face were Rangers, who refused to accept that failure was an acceptable option. As she prepared for her next class, Elara Stoneheart reflected on the truth that had guided her entire Ranger career: the most important qualification for any warrior wasn't perfect training or flawless equipment, it was the determination to find ways to succeed when success seemed impossible, and the courage to implement those solutions regardless of personal cost. The moment she had thrown her crossbow that morning in the morning, Borderlands had saved 12 Ranger lives and disrupted enemy operations throughout the region. But the lessons learned from that desperate innovation would continue saving lives for decades to come as new. Generations of Rangers learned that the most effective weapon any force could possess was the willingness of individual warriors to exceed every limitation that enemies tried to impose. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.